What made you a PhD, an economist, and not the taxi driver that you started with as?
Well, it's not all me. That is, anyone who has gone the distance I've gone, he has not done it all by himself. That is, there are many people along the way who were able to give me a helping hand. I married a very good woman who was very, very supportive of me. And then, as my stepfather used to tell me, if you want to get somewhere, you have to come early and stay late. And I was just willing to make the sacrifice of time and effort to be able to get the job done.
Your criticism of blacks in America today, what is it?
Well, I don't have, it's not so much criticism of blacks as the system. That is, where people who will say, look, we need special favors. I think that special favors are an insult. That is, to tell somebody, look, you can't make it on your own. You need the government to help you. I think that is insulting to a person. And you know, in your own country, when I was visiting Porto Alegre a couple times giving speeches.
When was that?
This is like in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I would just kind of walk around to the various stores and window shopping and going, and I found that most of high-tech materials, goods in Brazil were more expensive than the United States. That is, to get computers or to get printing material, they're far more expensive. And I said, how? Well, it was because of the government making regulations. And during my speech, my first speech down in Porto Alegre, I said, I am very sure that there are people meeting in Brasilia every day to write rules to make Brazilians much poorer than they otherwise would be.
So we're lagging behind.
Yeah, no. The reason why is that Brazil was able to end slavery without a very costly war like we had in the United States. We had a war that cost 500,000, 600,000 people.
Right.
The most costly war that we've had in our country. And Brazil and many of the Caribbean islanders, they were able to end that ugly institution of slavery without the kind of violence that we had in the United States. So on that basis, I'm saying, if I were a man from Mars, looking back, I would say, well, Brazilian blacks ought to be far ahead than American blacks.
You're telling me that if in Europe, the Roma, or in Israel, the Palestinians, and in Cisjordania, the Palestinians, were to be free of the constraints, the legal constraints that they have.
Economic regulations, yes.
You think economic regulations will lift them up?
Yes,
quickly?
I think they'd be richer. If you look around the world for riches, you find that richer people are in areas where there's freer economics. That is, where there's less. You go to the index of economic freedom, and is published by the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation, and you just look at, you say, well, where are people richer? It's in those countries where you find the greater measure of economic freedom. I mean, and how does China all of a sudden become so much richer now? It's because they've given their citizens more economic freedom. If you compare,
these citizens have a one-party system.
Well,
they cannot go
not
strike for wages.
Not political freedom. I'm talking about economic freedom.
The libertarian denomination or classification is strange to most Brazilians, and right or left is more recognizable. How do you define yourself?
Probably as a radical.
To the right?
No, just a radical. I mean, that I believe, see, my starting point for thinking about anything is that I own Walter Williams. I belong to me. You own you. And so once you start with the notion of self-ownership, then certain things are moral and certain things are immoral. That's the reason why murder is immoral, is because it violates private property. Rape is immoral. It violates private property. Theft is immoral. It violates private property. And
it boils down to this.
Yes, and theft is immoral whether it's done individually or collectively by government. That is whenever if I took your money and gave it to some poor person, I'd be guilty of theft.
Right.
When the government does the same thing and gives it to a poor person, they're guilty of theft. It's just two kinds of theft. One is illegal and one is legal.
Bill Cosby, the famous Bill Cosby, grew up around there as well.
Yeah, across the street from me.
Friend of yours.
Yeah.
Bill Cosby for many years has defended the position that blacks should not be the object of a differentiation in treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, they should fend for themselves.
Yeah.
You defend the same position.
Well, I think that using the government to create gains for some people at the expense of other people, I think is morally wrong. It's morally offensive. That is, discrimination by way of government, I think, is just wrong.
Your friend Bill Cosby has strong criticism of blacks in America.
Yeah. I mean, well, there are many black folks that depend on government too much. They depend on somebody else helping them, and I think that's not a part of black history in our country. If you look at the high rates of illegitimacy among blacks and the high crime rates today, that's all new. That is not a part of black history in our country. And so that's what Bill Cosby and also I would criticize as well.
But, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, as a senator, once told John Kennedy, a welfare state will destroy black families in America.
Mm-hmm.
Was he right?
Yes, he is absolutely right. That is, if you look at the black family structure from slavery until maybe 1940s, 1950s, 80-some% of black kids lived in two-parent families, a mother and a father. Today, it's less than 35%. Illegitimacy among blacks was in the 30s and 40s, like 10 or 15%. Today, it is 70 or 80%. And I believe it's the welfare state. That is what people have done. We've subsidized slovenly behavior. And when you subsidize something, you get more of it. And then also, there's less social sanctions taken against a person who engages in promiscuous sexual activity. You
are against a minimum wage anywhere?
Yes, I am. And I wrote about that. I wrote a book called South Africa's War Against Capitalism. The major supporters of minimum wage laws in South Africa, they call them rate for the job laws in South Africa, are racist white unions that would never allow a black to be a member of their union. And their stated reason, and this is, I give many quotations in the book, their stated reason is to protect white workers from having to compete with low-skill, low-wage black workers. That is, if white workers are getting $5 an hour and under the apartheid system, and black workers are willing to work for $1 an hour, who is the employer going to hire? He's going to hire the black worker because he wants more profits. And so if the white workers can get a law saying you have to pay blacks and whites the same wage, then employers will discriminate against blacks because it doesn't cost them anything.
If we go back in history, at one certain point, a vast majority of the population of the Roman Empire was slave.
Mm-hmm.
If from one day to the other you turn all the slaves into free men, what opportunities should you give them, or should they look for, in order to, what is the same situation that happened at the end of the Civil War, or when slavery was abolished in Brazil? How do you take a population that has been put down, has been kept uneducated, has been brutalized, how then do you bring them to an economic function in society?
What you do is that you eliminate all these restrictions that I just talked about, all these government regulations, and then just let time take care of it. I mean, it's just like, for example, it's the same reason, like at one time, as I suggested earlier, blacks were not allowed to be in professional basketball. And so, do you think they're 80% today? It was not because of affirmative action. It says, look, we're going to have an open season, we're going to have an open system, and everybody competes.
But if you are...
And so the same thing applies to chemistry, physics, or medical profession. If you say open the system and let everybody compete, they're not going to change overnight. It's not going to be overnight.
But that's the point. It is, in theory, one thing to reason this way. The other thing is, if you are a freed slave and your kids are small, how long will their kids have to wait without any help to arrive to the same level of the society that was oppressing you?
Well, we
3 generations, 5.
Black Americans did that in a little bit over a century. That is, most black Americans today are middle-class Americans. Most black Americans. There's a large percentage that are poor, 30-some% maybe, but most black Americans are middle class. That was not true after in 1865 when the Civil War was over. And so what I'm suggesting is that in a free society, what you have to worry about is create a free society, an open society. Get rid of a lot of the regulations that deny a person a chance to get into business for himself. Get rid of the ideas. In some places in South America, you know, it takes 500 days to go through the licensing procedure to be able to open a bakery or small shops and things like this, to establish private property rights. And those are the kind of things that establish liberty. And if you ask the question, how come it is in the United States that black people are the most prosperous in the world, it has to be associated with the liberty and rule of law that we have in the United States.
Let's see, in 1933, Hitler swore to the Weimar Republic that he would obey all the laws and principles of democracy. Well, some years later, he was authorizing Kristallnacht. Right after that, he was invading Poland. So how can you trust that those that you have the freedom to do whatever they want or to say whatever they want are not doing this to destroy exactly what that freedom permitted?
No, I'm not saying it. I'm against people murdering their fellow man. But however, if I'm for, let's go back a little bit. Tell me something. Or think about this. The audience ought to think about this. What is the true test of a person's commitment to freedom of speech? Does it come when he permits people to be free to say those things with which he agrees? Or does the true test come when he permits people to be free to say those things that he finds offensive?
Evidently the second.
It's the second. The same thing is with the freedom of association. Correct. The true test of one's commitment to freedom of association doesn't come when you allow people to be free to associate in ways you think is all right. It comes when you allow people to be free to associate in ways that you find despicable. Racial discrimination.
At the same time, what guarantees do you have that if today you say, let's have the Klan do what he wants?
That's a different question.
And let's believe them if they say to us that they will do whatever they say and so on and so forth, but they will never attack any other group and so on and so forth. And tomorrow they do.
Well, then the problem is not freedom of association. The problem is violence. That's the problem. And so you want to stop one person's violence against another person, but at the same time you want people to be able to freely associate with. That is, if I'm a member, does anybody think that the NAACP, which is the National Association of Advancement of Colored People, do you think they should be forced to allow the Ku Klux Klan to be members? Or should they be able to say, look, if you don't believe in black advancement, you cannot be in our organization. They're not freely associating. Or if I'm in a group of golfers, and I don't want you in my golf club, it's a private golf club, why shouldn't I?
Because I'm white.
Yeah, yeah. Or because of any reason, because you're short. And I say, well, look, I don't like short people. I think tall people.
Just tall people here.
Yeah, right, just tall people.
You may not be a betting man, but if you were to bet on a free market where instead of stocks you would have college professors, would you bet in the success of the college professor that is more controversial?
I wouldn't bet on a college professor at all. I mean, I think I wouldn't bet on the. I think that intellectuals have messed up this world.
You are one.
With their yes, I'm an intellectual, but I think intellectuals have messed up this world. The poor guy driving the taxi cab, he has no power whatsoever. Nobody listens to his ideas, and so. But with intellectuals, people listen to our ideas, and many times they shouldn't listen to our ideas at all.
Yours included.
Yeah, mine included.
Why?
Because I think what you need to do, you have to have independent thought. I mean, but intellectuals are able to. Politicians listen to intellectuals, and then politicians make rules and regulations. Politicians don't listen to cab drivers. It's not cab drivers down in Congress. It's college professors, and it's intellectual elite.
And that is not changing lately with the advent of the social networks, the internet.
Oh, I think that's a good thing. Yeah, it's changing. I think that's a good sign.
What was your biggest surprise with what has been happening in the Middle East, if any?
I don't know. It's part of the world that does not respect individual liberty. Matter of fact, most of the world, in most of mankind's history, has been subject to arbitrary abuse and control by others. Personal liberty is relatively rare in human existence.